Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today I'll be doing a retro review of Yankee Doodle Dandy. Finally have seen this movie, and I have a lot to say about it. But before I go into my full review, I first off want to say thank you to everyone for understanding having to cancel last night's live stream, and also for all of your thoughts and prayers for baby Thor. He is doing much better today. He's able to keep his food down, which is awesome, and right now he is napping like a champ. And so thank you again very much for understanding and also for your very kind words. And before I go any further into the review, though, please make sure that you do smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey, and make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live onto the channel. So let's talk about Yankee Doodle Dandy. Got a shout out, of course, Rosie G12 for sending me this film to review. And it's awesome that a lot of people who are part of the channel, who are part of the Asgardian community, always find out movies that I've never seen, or styles or genres or decades of films that I'm not experts in, and they love to say, hey, you should check this out, or hey, you should look at this. It really is awesome to show up at the P.O. box and find movies sent to me because I happen to on stream say I hadn't seen X movie or hadn't seen certain films with X person in it. And so thank you again for sending this out to me, because yeah, I actually had no idea that James Cagney had actually any musical chops whatsoever. Typically, whenever I think of James Cagney, as I'm not an expert on him or necessarily on that time in history either, all I can really ever think of, and the thing that my mind usually goes to, is his role as being a gangster, right? Typically, James Cagney, and you look at his face right there with the American hat on and him saluting, and I just look at that and I think, no, that he's a gangster. Like, what is he doing in a musical? This is kind of weird for me to be able to see. So I think that is something that was a little bit jarring at first, but he really naturally fits into this role very well, because it's very clear that he has some training as far as dancing and singing is concerned. His dancing, I think, is a bit better than his singing, but the singing really isn't all that, I would say, demanding as compared to the dancing, which again he does a phenomenal job with. So it was really cool to see this actor in a role that I had never seen before. So again, this film from 1942, as it says, an American biographical musical film about George M. Cohan, known as the Man Who Owned Broadway. So it goes into the life. So it starts off with the character of George M. Cohan going to meet President Roosevelt, and essentially telling Roosevelt his career and telling him about the process by which he and his family, who of course started off with, in this vaudeville era, and started off with this traveling show as the Four Cohens, and basically how he, started off as being very self-centered. As a young child, he was given a leading role, and he thought to himself, oh wow, I'm the reason why people love this movie. I'm the reason why people are very drawn to this. And you start to see the ego start to come out to play, and you also see that over the course of time, he starts to recognize that ego is going to hold him back, not just in his career, but also in his relationships with other people, especially within his family. And then, of course, it then leads to him as an adult being able to go off on his own and to really just, as it says, own Broadway with all of the musicals and shows that he puts on. And as he dives into even trying to do a drama at one point and not being as successful. And the story is told very well. I think it's very nice that they have very minimal voiceover. So whenever they're going back in time, the voiceover, I think, is rather limited, which is a good thing. It allows the actual scenes to play out with the actors at that time in history, instead of you just getting voiceover explaining everything that's going on. So I like the reservation being used there with the use of voiceover, because obviously we know movies that can sometimes kind of go overboard with it. And also, there aren't too many cuts back and forth in time either, and I thought that was also very nice too. You only really have a couple of moments in the film where you jump back to the present, where he is talking with President Roosevelt, and I really did like how that was portrayed, because some movies I think can sometimes get lost in the weeds trying to tell two different stories at once, whereas this one, it's basically like a beginning and an end cap, and then the entire middle and everything in between is all linear storytelling, going through the different parts of his life as he's growing up and becoming the songwriter and producer that he eventually became known to be. Also really cool to know that this is based off of an actual historical person. I actually did not know that at the time. And when I started to hear the songs and the music, including Yankee Doodle Dandy, which I've known since I was a child, I did not know that was written by George M. Cohan. So all the songs of this movie are written by George M. Cohan, so they're all from his all from his collection of songs, and they were then adapted for this movie. And it was just really interesting to find out the origin point of it, because as I was watching the film, at first I thought, oh, these songs were written for this movie. Oh, I didn't know that this was the movie that introduced some of these famous songs into the world. But instead, as I was reading the article, I realized, oh no, this is actually all music from the person who they are basing this off of. So I didn't know that this was a biography at first. And obviously, I think that even not knowing it was a biography, I was still able to enjoy the film and actually appreciate the film a lot more, knowing that it is actually a biography and has a biographical nature to it. It's also cool to see that George M. Cohan did have a role as far as being involved in the production of the film, pretty much giving his thumbs up to the way that Cagney portrayed the role. It was interesting because apparently there was another famous actor at this time, very much known for his singing and dancing abilities, who actually ended up turning it down because it just didn't fit his style. So Fred Astaire was actually eyed for this role, but Fred Astaire has a much more natural movement, a much more fluid movement in his dancing, and so he didn't feel like he was the right person for it. He didn't feel like he was the one who could really, portray that role as well. And that was actually one of the things at first, which was a critique, was I was looking at the style of James Cagney, and I was like, oh, he seems a little bit stiff, right? It doesn't seem to be as fluid as some of the other dancers like Fred Astaire may have been. But now looking back in retrospect and realizing that this character was actually very much, in his dancing style, was known for being a very stiff-legged dancer. I really did appreciate that, and thought that the fact that Cagney was able to really emulate that, and that his own dancing style was actually able to complement that, was a really cool thing to see. And so this movie, overall, talking about the positives, has pretty much a lot of things going for it. I think that it's very well written. I think that the acting, of course, is phenomenal. I think that the direction is very good and fluid, and the cinematography and all of the direction as far as the dancing and choreography. It's really cool to see some of these scenes where there's just tons of dancers and they're all in sync with each other and they're all doing the things that they're supposed to do. And it also, a bit of a backstory, I think the history of this film and one of the reasons why James Cagney may have done a movie like this in the 1940s is also kind of interesting, because James Cagney was one of the persons when you had the House of Un-Americans activity, right, when they were trying to go after and find all the communists in Hollywood, how apparently he was someone that was said to be a communist, and he actually had to have his name cleared by someone in his life, and it finally was. But then there's also this very interesting comment and critique that's mentioned here about how basically they say, yeah, you know what? We probably need to make the most American movie ever. It says here, Cagney refuted the accusation, and Martin Diaz Jr. made a statement to the press clearing Cagney. William Cagney, one of the film's producers, who also is his brother, is reported to have said that to his brother that, quote, we're going to have to make the G-damnest patriotic picture that's ever been made. I think it's the Cohan story, end quote. And just looking at this film, it truly is one of the most American films that you can really watch. Again, the fact that you have a character called Yankee Doodle Dandy, you have this character that's born on the 4th of July. It's a very, very American story, and I just knowing that bit of history, though, as maybe a motivating factor as to why the Cagney brothers decided to do this film, both James Cagney in the acting role and his brother in a producing role, is kind of interesting to me. And also, it got nominated for 8 Academy Awards and actually won 3 of them. It's really interesting to see that. Also, this is really one of the few films that I've actually seen from the entire career of Michael Curtiz. Michael Curtiz is someone that I really haven't watched a whole lot as far as his films overall are concerned. I mean, I've seen Casablanca, and it's one of my all-time favorite movies, but it's interesting how Casablanca, being one of my all-time favorites, didn't really ever lead me to want to find out more about the director. I think the reason why is because when I look at Casablanca, I see Humphrey Bogart, I see the actors, I see the story, and so I don't really think about nearly as much the director behind the film, and I think that it's interesting how this is now only the second film of his that I have seen, at least to my knowledge, based on the films that are being posted about here. But yeah, very, very well done. So obviously very solid director with these 2 films being under his belt. And I'm sure there's tons of other films that people are going to say in the comments saying, oh, if you've never seen other films by him, you might want to check X, Y, or Z out. But yeah, anyway, overall, Yankee Doodle Dandy, as I said, great acting, great score, again, great adaptations of the original music. It's really cool to see kind of like an origin story of the music that is being presented in this, because it's songs that we just take for granted and we just typically will talk about and and see being used in popular culture even today in 2021. Even with the nonsense of what's going on today, we still see these songs have a very prominent role in American society. And so, yeah, overall, I enjoyed it a lot. As far as issues are concerned, I did find that there was some issues, I would say, with some of the pacing, some of the editing. Nothing too bad, nothing that was too distracting, but it was definitely a film that I think that I enjoyed it the first time, but I don't know if I would ever want to watch it again necessarily. It doesn't really have, I think, for me, one of those stories, and maybe it's just the problem with biographical stories is that typically they're movies where you watch it, you learn something, and then you're like, okay, maybe I can watch it again, and maybe I won't, because I really, off the top of my head, can't think of a lot of biographical films that I consider to be some of my favorites of all time that I go back to or want to go back to constantly. So maybe it's just a part of the genre itself. It's part of the nature of the genre, or at least the way that I interact with that genre. So if I had to give this film a grade, I'd give it an A-. I think it's a very solid film, great score, great acting. You know, it has all of those very clear objective qualities to it that I think are going very well. And subjectively, I thought it was a very good time. And again, great cast, and the music is a lot of fun too. And it's interesting to see all these different parts of history. And obviously, there's aspects here talking about the different, world wars and the, the draft and, things, or rather people, joining to join the army. And there's a really great part here where the character played by James Cagney tries to actually sign up for the armed services, but he's 7 years too old. He's like 37 and the cutoff is 31. And I just thought that was interesting because I'm not really an expert when it comes to the wars in our country, like World War I, World War II. I know a little bit more about World War II than World War I, but it was just interesting to see that take place and to see all of these different things happen in the ways that they did. And especially too about how basically he says, what do you mean I'm too old? And this is a young man's game, and he dances for them and shows he's got tons of energy and everything. I thought that was a lot of fun to see. But anyway, what are your thoughts about Yankee Doodle Dandy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button. It really does mean a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my July Patreon and Subscribe Star members: Andrew Hoyle, Biffer de Hobbit, Brian P., Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina B, and Tina Bojan. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon, and also to my Subscribe Star members: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J. Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. And I also want to make sure to shout out my Locals members. I am now available over at locals.com, and I've got 2 monthly supporters over there. The first of my local supporters is Goblin Squatch. Shout out to you, good sir. And also, I now have a second supporter over on locals.com, and that is Robert Barnes. Shout out to both of you very much. Thank you very much for supporting me on that new platform at the Keeper of the Bifrost level. If you want to find out more information about that, go check out my Locals page. You can find the link in the description, and it tells you everything that you would get in that Keeper of the Bifrost level, which is right now the only level available on that platform. And I also want to make sure to shout out any new Patreon members. And for right now, I want to shout out Mondo Spieler, who is my newest member over on Patreon. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video on the channel, please make sure to check out the links in the description of ways that you can support me over on Patreon and Subscribe Star as well. It gives you access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and digital codes. Also, access to a podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where we have a lot of fun. We also answer Q&A questions as well. And also you might get access to the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to a once-a-month podcast exclusively where I bring on you to the main channel with everyone else who is at the level, and we all just talk about movies, pop culture, and tons of fun stuff like that. And also, of course, Tina, who is the Empress of the Universe, is going to give us tons of reviews of movies and also maybe a couple of awesome rants here and there as well. So if that sounds fun to you, make sure you go ahead and check out those links. Again, you're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.